Let's talk about the Bromeliad by Terry Pratchett. These are kids slash very young adult books. You might think of them as they're really high middle grade. This edition of the Bromeliad was published in 1998, but the individual books, Truckers, Diggers and Wings, were published in 1989, 1990 and 1990 again. This is the first time I'd ever read this, when I recently read it with my family. We've read it over the last year or so, year and a bit. We read different things at different times, and this is something that when we're all together, we've read, and sometimes it'll be a couple of pages, sometimes a chapter. We also read, actually, I've got another good book that we read, Legends of Britain by Clos, Quinel and de Montgom, which is in the Myths and Legends series from Burke Books. But yeah, the Bromeliad is a middle grade fantasy about thousands of gnomes, little gnomes, about this high, maybe this high, who mostly in the first book in Truckers live under the floorboards of a department store with a strange little object called the Thing, which they religiously revere, but which one day wakes up, it seems, and starts to talk. They're not the only gnomes we meet in that first book. Our other group of heroes who transfer to the department store live outside. They're a small tribe of pretty harried gnomes with only two younger gnomes left, who are basically late middle age or old, Grimmer and Masklin. And Masklin has sort of ended up. He's not the leader. Both Granny Morkel and Torrit, these old gnomes, they're really the leaders. But Masklin is the practical day to day. I'm going to go and do the hunting. I'm deciding what we're doing, because he's one of the two young gnomes left, and him and Grimmer have to run everything in practice. And they decide they've got to move. They've got to go somewhere, so they go to the store and they meet this much wealthier, vastly advanced gnome society. And this is in the blurb. So, and this is about by chapter 3 or 4. They hear the store is going to be demolished, and so they've got to think. They've got to get out of there. They've got to escape and survive, and obviously they've got to work out how to work in this world of massive things. How are they going to get somewhere else? How are they going to travel all the way to wherever they're going to travel to? Diggers and Wings continue that story without spoiling what they are. It is not a spoiler to suggest that there is a digger in these books, given that it's on the cover. These are really lovely stories. They are Pratchett, around the time he begins to hit his stride, the early 90s. Guards is a very similar time. For instance, I think that's 89, is it, or 90? You're talking about Pratchett in his early peak, and he had a long peak. He had a kind of 16 or 17 year peak of books which are just very good, with very few caveats attached. So the writing is pure Pratchett, but sanitized in an appropriate way for a younger audience. It's younger than the Johnny series, Johnny and the Bomb, Johnny and the Dead, Only You Can Save Mankind, those ones. It's similar to Carpet People, maybe very slightly more advanced. It's very funny. It's got lots of decent jokes in. The characters, many of them are very good and developed, over the course of what is, if you read the whole of it, 450 pages or so. They develop. There are things that happen in their arcs. In an individual book, there's, comparative, apart from maybe the last one, there's fairly little character development that you notice over 150 pages. You're like, oh, okay, I've seen something change. But you see a bit of that each book, and over the arc of the trilogy, you have characters, Masklin, Grimmer, Dorcas, Angalo, and Gerda, particularly, probably the 5 that are most relevant. They all develop and change, and you see things happen in their lives. Things happen to them and they react to them. They have tensions or problems, things inside themselves or between them and others, which have to be resolved, and they do. So the character work is actually, for middle grade books, incredibly subtle and good. The action, the plot, at points, I think by the third book, the plot is meandering a bit. I don't mean it's not slow in the sense that it's, the third book's 158 pages, and plenty happens, but there's certainly a sense that the plot itself, after relative tension in the first two books, the third book, the plot is a bit less kind of driven. But it's by that point, I think he's just trying to do different things. The plot is solid. At points, it's quite good and driven and tightly wound. Other points, it's just there as a field for the characters to wander around the world, trying to work out who they are and how they react to this strange new world of having to deal with different problems with the humans, who these very slow, dim, strange creatures, you know, a step above dogs or something. The way they deal with belief systems, and this is the other thing with Pratchett. These are ideas books. All of Pratchett's books are ideas books. These no less. It's something I think actually that if you want to distinguish Pratchett from Gaiman in some ways, and they're the two British authors of the 20th century, late 20th century, to be, you know, who can be reasonably closely compared. 21st century as well, of course, for both of them. Gaiman's still writing now. But if you compare their work, a difference is that Gaiman is massive vibes dude. He's a massive vibes writer, who there are ideas and emotions and views there, but you know, the real thing is the atmosphere of the stuff he's creating and the way the characters exist in the atmosphere. Whereas for Pratchett, characters relate to ideas. They process things at some level cerebrally. I think there is a distinction there in the writing styles, and this is a really good example of that. Interestingly, compare this to Coraline on the Graveyard Book, if you want to continue that game. Here you have characters constantly reacting to change, to new information, to ideas of religion and science, and certainly Pratchett has his views on those things, and you can certainly say that any ideas book, if you're reading with your kids, you're going to need to discuss those ideas. There's some degree of like mental preparation you'll need if you're reading with kids rather than on your own. If you're reading on your own as an adult, it's going to be fairly gentle, isn't it? I think. But he certainly is thoughtful and reflective, and not one note. It is not sledgehammer. This is just how things are in every way. There's suggestions and proposals about human nature and about the nature of the world, because the gnomes are proxy humans, of course, and they're meant to act like humans. But there are suggestions, there are strong proposals, there's certainly mockery and dismissal of certain things that Pratchett thinks are very bad. But there is also debate, and there is a range of viewpoints on some things, a range at least of personal reactions and personal natures, I guess, in relation to those ideas. So yeah, it's fun, it's clever, it's funny, the characters are good. It's not in my, you know, I don't know, it's not in my absolute top 3 or something. I need to check my Pratchett list, because did I put this or did I put something else in it? Not like because I'd read the first 2 books, so I think when I made my Pratchett top 10 Pratchett book video. But yeah, it's not my my absolute favourite Pratchett, but it's very good, and it's a very good representation of his YA middle grade, you know, the stuff that he's writing for younger readers particularly. It is much better than a lot of stuff you could read for your 10-year-old, and as an adult I certainly enjoyed it greatly. If you've read it, I'd love, or other middle grade and YA books by Pratchett, I'd love to know what you thought. Tell me in the comments, and what other good, call it fantasy or sci-fi middle grade that you really like as well. More recommendations. Till next time.